Little girls slept on a cardboard bed until their brother called Mom's emergency number. A CEO answered. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type Amen in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The rain hammered against the cracked window of the tiny apartment as 7-year-old Benjamin wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve. His stomach growled loudly, echoing in the sparse room where cardboard boxes served as furniture and hope seemed as thin as the walls. The sound of thunder rolled across the dark Detroit sky, matching the rumbling in his empty belly that had become a constant companion over the past few weeks. Across the room, his 3-year-old triplet sisters, Madison, Chloe, and Zoe, lay curled together on what they lovingly called their bed, though it was nothing more than flattened cardboard boxes their mother had carefully arranged and covered with a worn blanket she'd found at a thrift store. The blanket, once a cheerful yellow, had faded to a dull cream color and bore several small holes. But it was the only thing standing between the girls and the cold floor of their third-floor apartment. "Benny, I'm hungry," Madison whispered, her tiny voice barely audible above the storm outside. Her blonde curls were matted against her pale cheek, and her blue eyes held an innocence that broke Benjamin's heart every single day. Madison was the unofficial leader of the triplets, always the first to speak up when something was wrong, always trying to take care of her sisters even though she was only minutes older than them. "I know, Maddie. Mama will be home soon with food," he whispered back, though he wasn't entirely sure when their mother, Sarah, would return from her third job of the day. The routine had become painfully familiar. Sarah worked as a cleaner at an office building from 6 in the morning until noon, then rushed across town to her second job at Mickey's Diner until 6 in the evening, and finally worked nights stocking shelves at Save Mart grocery store until 2 in the morning. Despite her relentless effort and the fact that she rarely slept more than 3 hours at a time, the money barely covered their rent in this rundown neighborhood, leaving precious little for proper beds, adequate food, or the basic necessities most children took for granted. Benjamin looked at his sisters, their small bodies shivering despite the thin blanket. Chloe had been coughing for 3 days now, a persistent hack that kept her awake at night and worried Benjamin to his core. Every time she coughed, her whole tiny body shook, and she would look at him with those big eyes as if asking why she felt so bad. Zoe, usually the most energetic of the three and always ready with a giggle or a silly dance, had barely moved all day, her tiny hand clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen much better days. The rabbit, named Bunny with the straightforward logic of a 3-year-old, was missing one ear and had stuffing coming out of a hole in its side, but it was Zoe's most prized possession. The apartment was silent except for the rain and the occasional car passing by on the street below. No television. They couldn't afford cable or even basic channels. No computer, no video games, no toys except for a few items Sarah had managed to buy at yard sales and thrift stores when she had an extra $1 or $2. The walls were bare except for a single photograph of the 4 of them, taken at a free community event last Christmas, their smiles genuine despite their circumstances. In the photo, Sarah looked tired but happy, her arms wrapped around all 4 children as they sat in front of a donated Christmas tree at the community center. Benjamin walked to the kitchen, if the tiny space with a hot plate, a mini refrigerator that hummed loudly and occasionally stopped working altogether, and a sink that dripped constantly could be called a kitchen. He opened the nearly empty cabinet above the sink, standing on his tiptoes to reach the shelves. Half a loaf of bread, some peanut butter that was getting low, and a can of beans. That was dinner, and probably breakfast too, unless his mother managed to bring home leftovers from the diner, which sometimes happened when the cook made too much or when a customer left food on their plate. He made 3 small peanut butter sandwiches, carefully rationing the spread to make it last as long as possible, and brought them to his sisters on a chipped plate that was one of only 4 dishes they owned. The girls sat up slowly, their movements careful and deliberate in the way of children who had learned not to waste energy they didn't have. "Here, eat this," he said softly, helping Madison sit up properly. "Mama said she'd bring home something special tonight." It was a lie, but a necessary one. Sarah had stopped promising things she couldn't deliver months ago, after too many disappointments when expected tips didn't materialize or when hours got cut at one of her jobs. But Benjamin had taken over that role without anyone asking him to. trying to keep hope alive in their small world. At 7 years old, he had already learned that sometimes protecting the people you love means telling them what they need to hear rather than what's true. As his sisters ate slowly, savoring every bite in the way that children who are never quite full learn to do, Benjamin noticed his mother's old flip phone charging on the counter next to the hot plate. Sarah had found it at a pawn shop for $15 3 months ago, and it was their only connection to the outside world. The phone was at least 5 years old with a cracked screen and a battery that didn't hold a charge very well, but it worked well enough for Sarah to stay in contact with her employers and for emergencies. Benjamin had watched her program numbers into it with great care. The landlord's office, her supervisor at the cleaning company, the manager at Mickey's Diner, her boss at Save Mart, and one number marked simply as emergency. He'd memorized all the numbers just by watching her dial them, the way children do when they pay close attention to the important things in their small world. He'd asked about the emergency number once, and Sarah had explained it was for absolute emergencies only, when something terrible happened and they needed help immediately. But never use it unless someone is dying, baby, she had warned, her voice serious in a way that made Benjamin understand this was not a suggestion, but a rule. Promise me you'll only call if it's life or death. Benjamin had promised, but now, looking at his sisters again, he wondered what exactly counted as life or death. Chloe's cough was getting worse, her small body racked with each spasm. When she coughed, she sounded like the old man who lived downstairs, Mr. Peterson, who smoked too much and always seemed to be struggling to breathe. Zoe hadn't spoken in hours, just lying there with Bunny clutched to her chest, her eyes open but unfocused. Madison was so thin he could see her ribs through her worn pajamas, which had once belonged to another child, and were too big for her small frame. His own stomach felt like it was eating itself from the inside, a gnawing hunger that had become so constant he almost didn't notice it anymore. But today was different. Today the hunger felt sharper, more urgent, like his body was sending him a warning signal that couldn't be ignored. Were they dying slowly? Was this an emergency? The rain continued to pour outside, drumming against the window with increasing intensity. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the dark sky, and lightning briefly illuminated the small apartment. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Benjamin knew that if the power went out, they had no backup plan. No candles, no flashlight, no way to heat food or keep warm except for the thin blankets they huddled under. Benjamin picked up the phone with trembling hands, staring at the simple display screen. The blue backlight cast an eerie glow in the dim apartment, and he could see his reflection in the cracked screen. His mother wouldn't be home for 6 hours. His sisters needed help now. The rational part of his 7-year-old mind told him that they weren't actually dying, that they had survived worse days than this. But another part of him, the part that had been forced to grow up too fast, recognized that they were balanced on the edge of something dangerous. With his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears, Benjamin scrolled to the contact marked emergency and pressed the call button. The phone rang once, and he almost hung up. It rang twice, and his palms started to sweat. It rang 3 times, and he began to wonder if anyone would answer. On the 4th ring, a deep, authoritative voice answered, "Harrison Sterling." Benjamin's mouth went dry. The voice sounded important, powerful, like the voices he heard on the radio in the diner when his mother occasionally brought him to work with her. This was not at all what he'd expected from an emergency number. He had imagined maybe a police officer or a social worker, someone whose job it was to help children. For a moment he almost hung up, but then Madison coughed again, a painful, harsh sound that cut through his fear like a knife. "Hello?" the voice said again, this time with a hint of impatience. "Is someone there?" I'm sorry to bother you, sir," Benjamin stammered, his 7-year-old voice shaking with nervousness. "But me and my sisters, we're sleeping on a bed made of cardboard, and we're really hungry, and my sister is sick, and I don't know what to do. And my mama said this was for emergencies, and I think we need help." Silence on the other end of the line. Benjamin held his breath, wondering if the man had hung up. He could hear the sound of papers rustling, and what might have been a chair creaking, as if the person on the other end had sat down suddenly. Then, in a voice completely transformed, softer, almost gentle, the man spoke again. "What's your name, son?" "Benjamin, sir. Benjamin Parker." "And how old are you, Benjamin?" "7, sir. My sisters are 3. They're triplets, and they're the best sisters in the whole world. But one of them has been coughing for days, and another one hasn't talked all day, and I'm scared something bad is going to happen to them." Another pause, longer this time. "Where are you calling from, Benjamin? What's your address?" Benjamin rattled off their address, 412 Maple Street, apartment 3C, his voice growing stronger as the man continued to listen patiently. "Sir, are you really going to help us? Because I don't want to get in trouble for calling if you can't. My mama works really hard and she does her best, but sometimes it's not enough and I don't know what else to do." "Benjamin," the man's voice was thick with emotion now, "you're not in trouble. You did exactly the right thing by calling. You're a very brave boy for taking care of your sisters like this. I want you to stay right where you are, okay? Someone is going to come help you very soon." "Really?" Benjamin's voice cracked with relief. "You promise?" "I promise." "Benjamin, what's your mother's name?" "Sarah Parker, sir. Sarah Elizabeth Parker. She's the best mama in the world, even when we don't have much." The line went so quiet that Benjamin thought the call had dropped. He pulled the phone away from his ear to check the display, but the call was still connected. "Sir, are you still there?" "Yes, I'm here." The man's voice sounded strange now, almost shocked, like he had just heard something impossible. "Benjamin, I'll be there soon. Take care of your sisters until I arrive, okay?" "Okay, sir, thank you so much." The call ended, and Benjamin stared at the phone in his small hands. Something in that man's voice had changed when he'd mentioned his mother's name, but Benjamin couldn't understand what it meant. The change had been subtle but definite, like when his mother heard a song on the radio that reminded her of something from long ago. All he knew for certain was that help was coming, and for the first time in months, he felt a spark of real hope burning in his chest. He sat down next to his sisters on their cardboard bed and pulled them close, feeling their small, warm bodies against his. "Someone's coming to help us," he whispered into Madison's hair. "Someone nice is going to make everything better." Madison looked up at him with those serious blue eyes. "Really, Benny?" "Really. I called the emergency number and a man said he's coming to help." "Will he bring food?" Chloe asked between coughs. "I think so. And maybe real beds too." "Real beds?" Zoe spoke for the first time all day, her voice soft and wondering. "Real beds with real mattresses and real pillows," Benjamin said, painting a picture he hoped would come true. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, but Benjamin couldn't shake the feeling that an even bigger storm was about to begin. Something about the way the man's voice had changed when he heard their mother's name suggested that this phone call was going to change everything, in ways that Benjamin couldn't even imagine. For now, though, it was enough to hold his sisters close and wait for help to arrive. Harrison Sterling stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Industries, staring out at the Detroit skyline as rain streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows. The phone call had ended 15 minutes ago, but the child's voice still echoed in his mind like a haunting melody. Benjamin Parker. Sarah Elizabeth Parker. The names hit him like a physical blow, each syllable carrying the weight of 8 years of regret and what-ifs. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass and closed his eyes, remembering. 12 years ago, Sarah had been the love of his life, a bright, ambitious woman studying business administration while working 2 jobs to pay for college. She had dreams of opening her own consulting firm, plans that she would outline to him during their late-night conversations in his apartment near the university. They'd met at a coffee shop called The Grind, where she'd spilled coffee on his laptop while rushing between her shift and a study group. Instead of being angry, he'd been charmed by her genuine distress and immediate offers to pay for repairs she clearly couldn't afford. "I'm so sorry," she had said, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she tried to clean coffee off his keyboard with napkins. "I can pay for the damage. It might take me a few weeks, but I can pay for it." He'd been captivated by her honesty, her willingness to take responsibility even when it would clearly cause her financial hardship. "Don't worry about it," he'd said. but you can buy me a coffee to make up for it. That first coffee had turned into dinner, then into long walks around campus, then into a relationship that consumed both of them completely. Sarah was everything his privileged world wasn't. Real, honest, unimpressed by his family's wealth when she finally learned about it. She judged him by his character, not his bank account, and for the first time in his life, Harrison felt like he was valued for who he was rather than what he represented. Their relationship had been passionate but complicated from the beginning. Harrison was already being groomed to take over his father's company, with every aspect of his life carefully orchestrated by family expectations and business considerations. Board meetings, charity events, social obligations. His calendar was managed by assistants and planned months in advance. Sarah represented freedom, authenticity, a chance at a normal life where love mattered more than leverage. But when his father, William Sterling, discovered the relationship 8 months later, the pressure became unbearable. "She's not one of us, Harrison," his father had said coldly during a tense dinner at the family estate. "She'll never fit into our world, and she'll hold you back from your destiny. This company, this family name, they require certain standards, certain associations. End it now before it goes too far. She's a good person, Dad. She's smart, ambitious, hardworking. She's a diner waitress from the wrong side of town," his father had interrupted. "Do you think the board of directors will respect a CEO whose wife serves coffee for a living? Do you think our clients will take you seriously when your wife shows up to company events without the proper background, the proper education, the proper connections?" The pressure had been relentless. Not just from his father, but from his mother, his uncle who served on the board, family friends who whispered about Harrison's phase and how he needed to come to his senses. The weight of generations of Sterling legacy pressed down on him like a physical force. The final fight had been devastating. It happened on a cold February evening in Harrison's apartment, after weeks of tension and increasingly difficult conversations about their future. "You're ashamed of me," Sarah had said, tears streaming down her face as she paced his living room. "You've never introduced me to your family. You won't let me come to company events. You treat me like a secret you're embarrassed to acknowledge." "That's not true," Harrison had protested, but even as he said it, he knew she was right. "It's complicated, Sarah. There are expectations, responsibilities. Expectations that don't include me, apparently. Harrison, I need to know, do you see a future with me? Really? Or am I just something you're doing until you find someone more suitable?" The question had hung in the air between them like a sword. Harrison had wanted to say yes, wanted to promise her that they would find a way to make it work. But the voices of his family, the weight of his obligations, the fear of disappointing everyone who had invested in his future, it all crashed down on him at once. "I don't know," he had said quietly, and those 3 words had broken both their hearts. "You don't know," Sarah had repeated, her voice hollow. "After 8 months, you don't know if you want a future with me." "Sarah, please, it's not that simple." "It is that simple, Harrison. Either you love me enough to fight for us or you don't. Either I'm worth the risk or I'm not." "You're being naive about the realities of my position," Harrison had said, frustrated and defensive. "You don't understand the responsibilities that come with my family name, the expectations." "No, you're right. I don't understand how someone can claim to love someone else but refuse to choose them when it matters. I don't understand how you can hold me and tell me you love me, and then refuse to defend our relationship to your family." The argument had escalated from there, with both of them saying things they couldn't take back. Words about class differences, about Harrison's privilege, about Sarah's unrealistic expectations. The fight had ended with Sarah throwing her key to his apartment on the coffee table and delivering the final blow. "I never want to see you again," she had said, her voice steady despite the tears. "And if you really cared about me, you wouldn't want me to live in a world where I'm never good enough." That was the last time he'd seen her. Within a month, she'd dropped out of college and disappeared. Harrison had tried to find her, had even hired a private investigator, but she had vanished completely. He'd thrown himself into business, eventually taking over Sterling Industries 3 years ahead of schedule and building it into a multi-billion-dollar empire. He'd married Victoria Blackwood 3 years later, a union that satisfied both families and looked perfect in business magazines. They'd had a decent marriage, built on mutual respect and shared goals rather than passion, but they'd divorced after 5 years when it became clear that neither of them was truly happy. But he'd never forgotten Sarah. Never stopped wondering what might have happened if he'd been brave enough to choose love over legacy. Never stopped regretting the cowardice that had cost him the best thing that had ever happened to him. Now, a 7-year-old boy named Benjamin Parker was sleeping on cardboard, calling emergency numbers in desperation. The timing was impossible to ignore. If Sarah had been pregnant when they broke up, if she'd been carrying his child during those final horrible weeks when everything fell apart. Harrison's hands shook as he calculated the timeline. February 2017 when they broke up. If Benjamin was 7 and born in August, that meant he was conceived in November 2016, right in the middle of their relationship. Right around Thanksgiving, when they talked about spending the holiday together, and Sarah had mentioned wanting to cook dinner for him in his apartment. The realization hit him like a physical blow. During their final fight, Sarah had been carrying his child. While he'd been agonizing over family expectations and business obligations, she'd been facing pregnancy alone. While he'd been throwing himself into work to forget her, she'd been building a life as a single mother. Harrison sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd lost. Not just Sarah, but 8 years with his son, 8 years of birthdays, first steps, first words, bedtime stories, scraped knees, and all the countless moments that make up a childhood. 8 years while his child, learned to sleep on cardboard and call strangers for help. With trembling fingers, he called his personal assistant. "Margaret, I need you to cancel everything for the rest of the day. Clear my schedule for tomorrow too. And I need you to get me Dr. Collins on the phone immediately." "Sir, you have the board meeting at 4, and the Japanese investors are flying in specifically to..." "Cancel it all, Margaret. This is more important than any business meeting." Dr. Richard Collins had been the Sterling family physician for 30 years, and was one of the few people Harrison trusted completely. Within minutes, the doctor was on the line. "Harrison, Margaret said this was urgent. Are you feeling all right?" "Dick, I need a favor. I need a mobile medical unit sent to an address in downtown Detroit discreetly. There are children involved, a 7-year-old boy and 3-year-old triplets. They may need medical attention and I want them checked thoroughly." "Of course, what's the situation?" Harrison hesitated. How could he explain 8 years of regret and a phone call that had changed everything? "Dick, I think one of those children might be my son." Silence on the other end. Dr. Collins had known Harrison since childhood, had been there through his parents' messy divorce, through his own failed marriage, through all the personal crises that came with wealth and responsibility. He understood the weight of what Harrison was saying. "I'll handle it personally," the doctor said quietly. "Give me the address and I'll head over there immediately. Dick, there's something else. I need you to be prepared to run a DNA test, but discreetly. And if these children need medical care, anything at all, you handle it. Money is no object." "Understood." "Harrison, are you okay? This is quite a shock. Harrison looked out at the Detroit skyline, thinking about a little boy sleeping on cardboard while he lived in a penthouse. "I'm not sure I'll ever be okay again, Dick. But for the first time in years, I might have a chance to do something that actually matters." After ending the call, Harrison grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. His driver, James, was already waiting with the car when he reached the garage, having been called by Margaret with instructions to be ready for immediate departure. "Where to, Mr. Sterling?" James asked as Harrison settled into the back seat. Harrison gave him the address, then sat back and tried to prepare himself for what he might find. As they drove through the rain-soaked streets toward downtown Detroit, Harrison watched the neighborhood change. The gleaming office buildings and upscale restaurants of the business district gave way to struggling shops and aging apartment buildings. With each mile, the reality of his son's life became more apparent. The drive took 35 minutes through Detroit traffic, 35 minutes that felt like hours. Harrison used the time to make more calls, to his lawyer, to Margaret with instructions for liquidating some investments, to his accountant about setting up trust funds. If Benjamin was his son, Harrison was going to make sure that the boy never wanted for anything ever again. But more than that, he was going to have to find a way to earn forgiveness from the woman he'd never stopped loving. The woman who'd raised his son alone while he built an empire on the foundation of his cowardice. The address led them to a 4-story brick building that looked like it had been constructed in the 1960s and hadn't been updated since. Paint peeled from the walls. Several windows were boarded up, and the front entrance looked like it barely hung on its hinges. A sign in the lobby advertised affordable housing and rent by the week, the kind of place people ended up when they'd run out of other options. "Sir, are you sure about this location?" James asked, concern evident in his voice. "I'm sure, James. Wait here and be ready to drive wherever I tell you." Harrison climbed the narrow staircase to the 3rd floor, his expensive shoes echoing on the worn linoleum. The hallway smelled of old cigarettes and cleaning products, and the overhead lights flickered intermittently. He followed apartment numbers until he found 3C, then stood outside the door for a long moment, trying to prepare himself for what he might find inside. Finally, he knocked gently. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a small face with blonde hair and the most startling blue eyes Harrison had ever seen. Eyes that looked exactly like his own, like looking into a mirror that showed him his own childhood. "Are you the man from the phone?" Benjamin asked in his small voice. Harrison knelt down to the boy's eye level, his heart hammering in his chest. The resemblance was unmistakable, not just the eyes but the shape of his face, the way he held his head slightly tilted when he was curious. Even the stubborn cowlick in his blonde hair that Harrison remembered fighting with as a child. This was his son. He knew it with a certainty that went beyond logic or DNA tests. "Yes, I'm Harrison." "You must be Benjamin." "Yes, sir. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. My sisters are sleeping, but Chloe is still coughing, and I was getting really scared." Harrison followed Benjamin into the apartment, and what he saw made his chest tighten, with a combination of heartbreak and rage. Not rage at Sarah or Benjamin, but at himself, at the circumstances that had led to this moment. The space was clean but heartbreakingly sparse. In one corner, 3 tiny girls lay curled together on what was indeed a makeshift bed of flattened cardboard boxes covered with a thin blanket. Their blonde hair caught what little light came through the single window, and their faces were thin but peaceful in sleep. "They're beautiful," Harrison said softly, meaning it completely. "They're the best sisters ever," Benjamin said with fierce pride. "Mama says they're her sunshine girls because they're always happy, even when we don't have much. Madison is the brave one, and Chloe likes to sing, and Zoe loves her bunny more than anything in the world." "And where's your mother now?" "Working. She works 3 jobs to take care of us. She cleans offices in the morning, works at a diner during the day, and stocks shelves at night. She'll be home really late tonight, but she always brings us something when she can." Harrison felt a crushing weight settle in his chest. While he'd been building his empire, attending charity galas where single meals cost more than Sarah made in a week, and living in luxury, she had been working 3 jobs just to keep their son fed and housed. Their son. A gentle knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Doctor?" Collins had arrived carrying a small medical bag and wearing the kind professional expression that immediately put children at ease. "Hello there, young man. I'm Dr. Collins. Harrison asked me to come check on you and your sisters, just to make sure everyone is healthy." Benjamin looked between Harrison and the doctor, then back to Harrison. "Is it really okay? Mama always says we can't afford doctors." "It's okay, Benjamin. Dr. Collins just wants to make sure you're all feeling well." As the doctor gently examined the children, Harrison stepped outside into the hallway and called Margaret again. "I need you to arrange something immediately," he said quietly. "A family of 4 needs temporary housing tonight. Somewhere safe, clean, with proper beds and a full kitchen. The Marriott downtown has extended stay suites. Book the best one they have, and make sure it's stocked with everything a family with young children might need." "Of course, sir. Anything else?" "Contact our best family law attorney. I'm going to need advice on a very delicate situation involving custody and parental rights. And Margaret, this is completely confidential. No one else in the company needs to know about this yet." When he returned to the apartment, Dr. Collins was finishing his examination of the triplets who had woken up and were sitting quietly on their cardboard bed, watching the proceedings with wide, curious eyes. They're malnourished, but not dangerously so, the doctor reported quietly to Harrison. The cough is just a cold, nothing serious, nothing. But Harrison, these children need proper nutrition, warm clothing, and adequate shelter. The sooner the better. Harrison nodded, then knelt down next to Benjamin again. Benjamin, how would you feel about staying somewhere else tonight? Somewhere with real beds and a warm meal? The boy's eyes lit up like Christmas morning, then immediately grew worried. What about Mama? She'll be scared if we're not here when she gets home. We'll make sure she knows exactly where you are. In fact, why don't you call her right now and tell her what's happening? As Benjamin made the call to his mother's work number using the phone at the diner to reach her during her short break, Harrison stepped aside with Dr. Collins. Dick, I need you to run a DNA test, discreetly and as quickly as possible. The doctor nodded gravely. I can have results in 12 hours if needed. But Harrison, looking at that boy, I don't think you need a test to know what you already know. Harrison looked back at Benjamin, who was excitedly telling his mother about the nice man and the doctor who were going to help them. The boy's joy at such simple kindness was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. No, Harrison said quietly. I don't think I do. Whatever happened next, whatever Sarah's reaction would be when she learned who was helping her family, Harrison knew his life had just changed forever. But for the first time in 8 years, that change felt like it might be exactly what he needed. He just prayed it wasn't too late to make up for all the years he'd lost. Sarah Parker's hands trembled as she hung up the phone at Mickey's diner, where she'd been allowed to take the emergency call during her 15-minute break. Her supervisor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had graciously stepped in to cover her tables when Benjamin explained that someone was helping them with housing for the night. Everything all right, Sarah? Mrs. Rodriguez asked, concern creasing her weathered face. She'd always been kind to Sarah, understanding the struggles of a single mother, because she'd raised 3 children on her own after her husband died in a factory accident. I'm not sure, Sarah replied honestly, untying her apron with shaking fingers. Someone is helping my children tonight, but I need to leave work early to meet them. I know I can't afford to lose these hours, but... Go, Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly, waving away Sarah's concerns. Family comes first always. We'll figure out the hours later. Mickey won't dock your pay. I'll make sure of it. Sarah grabbed her worn jacket and rushed through the rain-soaked streets, her mind racing with questions and fears that multiplied with every step. Benjamin had said a man named Harrison Sterling was helping them. The name meant nothing to her, but her 7-year-old son had sounded more hopeful than she'd heard him in months. Still, years of struggle and disappointment had taught her to be wary of strangers offering help, especially help that seemed too good to be true. She'd learned the hard way that most people who claimed they wanted to help families like hers usually wanted something in return, or came with conditions that made their assistance more trouble than it was worth. Social workers who threatened to take her children away because their living conditions weren't adequate. Landlords who offered to waive rent in exchange for favors she would never consider. Well-meaning church groups who wanted to save her family by forcing them into programs that felt more like judgment than assistance. The 15-minute walk from the diner to their apartment building felt like an hour. Every step brought new worries. What if this Harrison Sterling was some kind of predator? What if he'd already taken her children somewhere and she'd never see them again? What if Benjamin had misunderstood and they were in some kind of trouble with authorities? She reached their building and climbed the stairs 2 at a time, her heart pounding from exertion and fear. The familiar smell of the hallway, a mixture of cooking odors, cleaning products, and age, usually comforted her because it meant she was home. But today, it felt ominous. The door to their apartment was open, and she could hear unfamiliar voices inside, deep male voices that didn't belong in her small world. Taking a deep breath and preparing herself for whatever she might find, she stepped through the doorway and froze. Standing in her tiny living room, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit and perfectly styled hair, was a man she'd tried to forget for 8 years. Older now, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and responsibility, but unmistakably the same person who had broken her heart and changed the course of her entire life. "Hello, Sarah," Harrison said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of years and regret. For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the impossibility of Harrison Sterling standing in her apartment, surrounded by the evidence of how far her life had fallen since their breakup. Then Benjamin ran to her, breaking the spell. "Mama!" he exclaimed, wrapping his arms around her waist with the fierce intensity of a child who'd been worried about her all day. "This is the man I told you about. He's going to help us get real beds tonight. And look, there's a doctor here too." Sarah stared at Harrison over her son's head, her mind reeling with the implications of his presence. All these years, the emergency number Benjamin had called belonged to Harrison? How was that even possible? Why would a billionaire CEO have given her his direct number 8 years ago? And more importantly, why had she been stupid enough to keep it? "Mrs. Parker, I'm Dr. Collins," said an older man with a medical bag who was clearly finishing an examination of her triplets. "Mr. Sterling asked me to check on your children. They're healthy overall, but they could benefit from better nutrition and warmer sleeping conditions." Sarah's protective instincts kicked in immediately, the way they always did when strangers made decisions about her children without consulting her first. "Who gave you permission to examine my children?" "Mama, it's okay," Benjamin said earnestly, looking up at her with those serious blue eyes that sometimes made him seem much older than 7. "Dr. Collins is really nice. He said Chloe's cough isn't serious and he gave us all vitamins. And he didn't hurt anybody or anything." Harrison stepped forward carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "Sarah, we need to talk, privately." "No," Sarah said firmly, her voice stronger than she felt. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of my children." The truth was she was afraid to be alone with him, afraid of what he might say, afraid of what she might say, afraid of all the emotions that seeing him again had stirred up. After 8 years of building walls around her heart, of convincing herself that she was better off without him, his presence in her tiny apartment felt like an earthquake that threatened to bring everything crashing down. "Please." Harrison's voice was softer now, almost pleading in a way that reminded her of the young man she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "Just 5 minutes. Dr. Collins can stay with the children." Something in his expression, a vulnerability she remembered from their most intimate moments together, made her relent. "Benjamin, stay here with Dr. Collins and watch your sisters, okay? I'll be right back." She followed Harrison out into the hallway, closing the door behind her with a soft click. They stood in the dim light of the flickering hallway bulb, 8 years of unspoken words and unanswered questions hanging between them like a physical presence. The hallway suddenly felt impossibly small, filled with his presence and the faint scent of expensive cologne that brought back memories she'd tried so hard to forget. "How?" Sarah asked simply, because she couldn't manage anything more complex. "Your phone number," Harrison replied, understanding immediately what she was asking. "You programmed my direct office line as your emergency contact. I never changed the number, even after all these years." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as the memory came flooding back. Years ago, when she'd first gotten the used phone from the pawn shop, she'd programmed Harrison's number during a moment of weakness, telling herself it was just in case of a real emergency. She'd been 3 months pregnant, scared and alone, and some irrational part of her had thought that maybe someday she might need to reach him. She'd labeled it emergency to avoid thinking about it, and over time she'd genuinely forgotten whose number it was. The irony was devastating. Her son had called his own father for help without either of them knowing it. "Sarah," Harrison continued, his voice breaking slightly. "Benjamin, when was he born?" Sarah closed her eyes, knowing that this question would change everything. There would be no going back after she answered it. "August 15th, 2017. Harrison leaned against the wall as if his legs might give out. She watched him do the mental calculations, watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question she'd known was coming, the question she'd been dreading for 8 years. "Tell you what?" Sarah's voice rose with old anger, old hurt that she'd thought was buried. "That I was pregnant? You made it very clear that I wasn't good enough for your world, Harrison. You chose your family's approval over me. What was I supposed to do, trap you with an unwanted baby? Unwanted? Harrison's eyes snapped open, blazing with an intensity that took her breath away. Sarah, if I had known. You would have what? She interrupted, all the pain and resentment of the past 8 years pouring out at once. Married me out of obligation? Set me up in some apartment as your secret family while you married someone suitable for business dinners? I knew exactly what my place would be in your life, and I couldn't do that to myself, or to my child. Our child, Harrison said quietly. My child, Sarah corrected firmly, her voice steel. I'm the one who held him when he cried with colic for 3 months straight. I'm the one who worked 3 jobs to keep him fed. I'm the one who slept on the floor so he could have the only real mattress we owned before we had to sell it to pay rent. I'm the one who walked him to free clinics when he had fevers because I couldn't afford a real doctor. Don't you dare waltz back into our lives after 8 years and claim ownership. Harrison slumped against the wall, looking suddenly exhausted and older than his 32 years. You're right, I have no claim to him. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. I never stopped thinking about you. I never stopped regretting how things ended between us. Well, your regret doesn't put food on the table or clothes on my children's backs, Sarah said bitterly. Your regret didn't keep us warm when the heat got shut off last winter because I couldn't pay the bill. Children? The triplets aren't. No, Sarah said quickly, some of the fight going out of her voice. The girls are Marcus's daughters. He was a good man, a construction worker who loved all of us like we were his whole world. We weren't married, but he was planning to propose when. Her voice broke, the way it always did when she talked about Marcus. He died in an accident when the girls were 18 months old. Fell from a scaffold at a job site. We lost our apartment because we couldn't afford it on just my income, and it's been a struggle ever since. Harrison absorbed this information, his heart aching for all the pain she'd endured. 8 years of raising children alone, of working multiple jobs, of losing someone she loved. 8 years of struggles he couldn't even imagine while he'd been living in luxury. I'm sorry, he said, and she could hear that he meant it. I'm sorry about Marcus, and I'm sorry about everything you've had to go through alone. Sarah wiped her eyes, trying to maintain her composure. Don't pity me, Harrison. I've made a good life for my children. They're happy and healthy and loved, even if we don't have much money. I can see that. Benjamin is. He's incredible, Sarah. The way he takes care of his sisters, the way he handled calling for help. You've raised an amazing boy. Despite herself, Sarah felt a flutter of pride. He's had to grow up too fast, but yes, he's special. Sarah, let me help. Not because I think I have any right to Benjamin, but because no child should sleep on cardboard, please. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation she'd learned to expect from people who offered help. But all she saw was genuine concern and something that might have been desperation. What exactly are you offering? Tonight, a safe place to stay with proper beds and food. Tomorrow we figure out something more permanent. I'm not trying to take Benjamin away from you. You're his mother, and from what I can see, you're an amazing one. But I can provide resources that will make your lives easier. And what do you get out of it? Harrison was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. The chance to know my son if you'll let me. The opportunity to help the woman I loved build the life she deserves. Loved, Sarah repeated quietly. Past tense. Their eyes met in the dim hallway, and for a moment, all the years disappeared. They were 22 and 24 again, full of dreams and possibilities before life and fear and pride had torn them apart. But the weight of the intervening years settled between them like a wall built of hurt and regret. The housing arrangement, Sarah said, pulling herself back to practical matters because emotions were too dangerous right now. What are the conditions? No conditions. Just a safe place for you and the children while we work out a longer-term solution. Sarah considered this, weighing her pride against her children's needs. Pride was a luxury she'd learned she couldn't afford, not when her children were sleeping on cardboard and eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. One night, she said finally. We'll try one night, and then we'll see. That's all I'm asking for. When they returned to the apartment, Benjamin was showing Dr. Collins, his small collection of books, most of them library books that Sarah managed to check out when she could find the time to walk to the branch library 6 blocks away. The triplets were awake now, sitting quietly on their cardboard bed and watching the adults with wide, curious eyes that took in everything. "Girls, come meet Mr. Sterling," Sarah said gently. Madison, always the bravest of the three, stood up first and walked over to Harrison with the serious expression she wore when meeting new adults. She tilted her head back to look up at him, her blue eyes solemn and assessing. "Are you really going to give us real beds?" she asked. Harrison knelt down to her level just as he had with Benjamin. "Yes, sweetheart. Real beds with soft mattresses and warm blankets." "Can Bunny come too?" she asked, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit protectively. "Of course Bunny can come. We wouldn't want to leave family behind." Chloe and Zoe joined their sister, forming a small semicircle around Harrison. He was struck by how different they looked from Benjamin. Where he was clearly a Sterling with his blue eyes and blonde hair, the girls had inherited their father's darker features and their mother's delicate bone structure. But they all shared the same quiet dignity, the same careful way of observing adults that spoke of children who'd learned early to read the moods and intentions of the grown-ups around them. "Mr. Sterling," Benjamin said formally, straightening his small shoulders, "thank you for helping my family. Mama taught me to always say thank you when someone is kind." Harrison looked up at Sarah, seeing the pride in her eyes as she watched her son. "You've raised an incredible boy, Sarah." "I've raised an incredible family," she corrected, encompassing all 4 children with her gaze. As they gathered the few possessions the family owned, clothes that fit in 2 garbage bags, a few toys, the library books, and the girls' stuffed animals, Harrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about providing temporary help anymore. Somehow, in the space of a few hours, these 4 people had become the most important thing in his world. But he also knew that gaining Sarah's trust again would be the hardest challenge he'd ever faced. She'd built walls around her heart for good reason, and breaking through them would require more than money or good intentions. As they prepared to leave the apartment, Benjamin tugged on Harrison's sleeve. "Mr. Sterling, will we really be able to come back if we don't like the new place?" "Of course, Benjamin. This is your choice, all of yours. I'm here to help, not to force anything." The boy nodded solemnly, then surprised Harrison by reaching up and taking his hand. "Okay, I trust you." The simple gesture, the small hand in his, nearly brought Harrison to his knees. His son trusted him. After everything, after 8 years of absence, his son was willing to trust him. The storm outside had finally passed, but Harrison suspected that the real storm was just beginning. Getting Benjamin and the girls settled somewhere safe was just the first step. Rebuilding trust with Sarah, figuring out how to be a father to a son who didn't know him, creating a family from the pieces of their broken past. That would be the real challenge. But for the first time in 8 years, Harrison felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The Marriott downtown suite felt like stepping into another world. Benjamin's eyes widened as he took in the spacious living room with its plush furniture, the kitchenette stocked with snacks and drinks, and most impossibly, 2 separate bedrooms with real beds covered in crisp white linens. The triplets stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sudden transition from their cardboard bed to luxury they'd never imagined. "This is all for us?" Madison whispered, her small voice echoing in the large space. "All for you," Harrison confirmed, watching as Zoe tentatively touched the soft fabric of the couch as if it might disappear at any moment. "There's food in the kitchen, clean clothes in your sizes, and those beds are yours for as long as you need them." Sarah remained near the door, her arms crossed defensively as she surveyed the suite. Harrison could see her calculating the cost of even one night in a place like this, probably more than she made in a month at all 3 jobs combined. The gesture was generous, but it also highlighted the vast gulf between their worlds in a way that made her uncomfortable. "Mama, look," Chloe called from the bedroom, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "The beds are so big. We could all fit in one and still have room for Bunny." Despite her reservations, Sarah couldn't help but smile at her daughter's joy. It had been so long since she'd seen the girls this excited about anything. She followed them into the bedroom, where all three triplets had climbed onto the king-sized bed and were bouncing gently, their laughter filling the space. "Careful, girls," she said automatically, though her heart wasn't in the warning. When was the last time they'd had space to just be children? Benjamin had discovered the bathroom and called out in amazement, "Mama, there's a bathtub. A real bathtub with hot water." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering when a hot bath had been a normal part of their routine instead of an impossible luxury. Their apartment had only a tiny shower that barely worked, and hot water was sporadic at best. "Benjamin, help your sisters wash up for dinner," she called back, then turned to Harrison. "This is too much." "It's not enough," Harrison replied quietly. "Sarah, I've seen how they're living, how you're all living. This isn't charity. It's the bare minimum of what they deserve." "What we deserve," Sarah's voice sharpened. "We deserve what we can afford, Harrison. We deserve what we work for. We don't deserve handouts from people who abandoned us." The word abandoned hung in the air between them like a physical blow. Harrison flinched but didn't argue, because she was right. He had abandoned them even if he hadn't known about Benjamin at the time. Dr. Collins, who had been quietly observing the children, approached them with his medical bag. "I'd like to do some blood work if that's all right with you, Sarah. Just to check their nutritional levels and make sure everything is functioning properly." Sarah nodded, understanding that this was about more than the children's health. DNA testing. Harrison wanted proof of what she could see written plainly across Benjamin's features. "Will it hurt?" Benjamin asked, appearing at his mother's side with damp hair from washing his face. "Just a tiny pinch," Dr. Collins assured him. "Much less than a bee sting." As the doctor drew blood samples from each child, explaining the process in gentle terms that kept them calm, Harrison stepped out onto the suite's balcony to make phone calls. Sarah could see him through the glass doors, pacing as he spoke into his phone with increasing urgency. "Mama," Benjamin said quietly, settling beside her on the couch as his sisters explored their temporary new world. "Is this man really going to help us? Or is this like when the church people said they'd find us a better place but then just gave us pamphlets?" Sarah's heart broke a little at the careful hope in her son's voice. At 7, he'd already learned not to trust good things that seemed too easy. Over the past 4 years, since Marcus died, they'd encountered numerous false promises from well-meaning organizations that offered help but delivered little more than paperwork and conditional assistance. "I don't know, baby. But even if it's just for tonight, it's wonderful, isn't it?" "Yeah," Benjamin agreed, then hesitated. "Mama? Do you know him? From before? You got that same look you get when you see pictures of Daddy Marcus." Sarah looked at her son, this wise little boy who noticed everything. "Yes, I knew him a long time ago, before you were born." "Were you friends?" The question was so innocent, but the answer was so complicated. "Something like that." Harrison returned from the balcony, his expression serious. "Sarah, I've arranged for a few things. Margaret, my assistant, is bringing some groceries and clothes for the children. Proper winter coats, shoes that fit, that sort of thing." Harrison stopped. Sarah stood up, facing him across the elegant living room. "This is moving too fast. I need time to think, to process all of this." "There's nothing to process," Harrison said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Your children need help. I can provide it. It's that simple." "Nothing about this is simple." Sarah's voice rose, then she caught herself glancing at the children. "Girls, why don't you explore the other bedroom for a while?" Once the triplets had wandered off, chattering excitedly, Sarah continued in a lower voice. "You can't just throw money at 4 years of struggle and expect everything to be fine. You can't buy your way into their lives." "I'm not trying to buy anything," Harrison said, though even as he said it, he realized that's exactly what it looked like. "I'm trying to help." "Why now? Why after all these years do you suddenly care about helping?" The question hit its mark. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Detroit skyline. "Because I didn't know," he said finally. "Because if I had known about Benjamin." "If you had known what, you would have chosen differently." Sarah shook her head. "Harrison, you made your choice 8 years ago. You chose your family's approval, your business obligations, your safe and predictable life. Don't pretend that knowing about Benjamin would have changed anything fundamental about who you are. It would have changed everything, Harrison said with quiet intensity. Sarah, I was a coward 8 years ago. I let fear and family pressure override what I knew was right. But Benjamin, he's my son. That changes everything. He's been your son for 7 years, Sarah pointed out. Where were you when he had pneumonia at 3 and I couldn't afford the prescription? Where were you when Marcus died and I had to explain to a 3-year-old why the only father he'd ever known wasn't coming home? Where were you when he started school and asked why he didn't have a daddy like the other kids? Each example was like a knife to Harrison's chest because he knew where he'd been. Living in luxury, attending business dinners, building wealth while his son struggled with questions about abandonment and identity. Benjamin appeared in the doorway looking uncertain. The triplets hung back behind him, their earlier joy dampened by the tension they could feel even if they couldn't understand it. Are you fighting about us? Benjamin asked quietly. No, baby, Sarah said quickly, going to him. We're just talking about grown-up things. Are we going to have to leave? Benjamin asked, his blue eyes serious. Because if Mr. Sterling doesn't want to help us anymore, that's okay. We've been okay before, we know how to be okay. The simple acceptance in his voice, the way he was already preparing himself for disappointment while also trying to protect his sisters from the same, broke something inside Harrison. This child, his child, was 7 years old and already experienced in the art of expecting nothing while hoping for everything. Benjamin, Harrison said, kneeling down to the boy's level, you're not going anywhere you don't want to go. This is about making sure you and your sisters are safe and happy. That's all. Promise? I promise. Dr. Collins packed up his medical supplies and approached Sarah quietly. I'll have the test results in the morning, but Sarah, that boy has Harrison's eyes, his facial structure, even his mannerisms. You can see it in the way he tilts his head when he's thinking, the way he protects his sisters. Sarah nodded wearily. She'd known Benjamin looked like Harrison from the moment he was born. Every day for 7 years she'd seen Harrison's face looking back at her from her son's features, a constant reminder of what they'd lost and what might have been. There's something else, Dr. Collins continued. I need to be honest with you about the children's health. They're not in immediate danger, but the malnutrition is more significant than I initially indicated. Benjamin especially. He's been giving most of his food to his sisters, hasn't he? Sarah's breath caught. She'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed made her chest tight with guilt and love. Her 7-year-old son had been sacrificing his own nutrition to make sure his sisters had enough. How long? She asked. Based on his growth charts and what I can observe, probably the better part of a year. He's small for his age, and his energy levels are lower than they should be. With proper nutrition, he'll catch up quickly, but Sarah, this situation can't continue. These children need stability, adequate food, and proper medical care. The weight of that statement settled over her like a heavy blanket. No matter how hard she worked, how many jobs she took, how carefully she budgeted, she wasn't able to provide enough. Her pride and her fear of depending on Harrison warred with the undeniable truth that her children needed more than she could give them alone. Mama? Benjamin was tugging on her sleeve. The girls want to take a bath. Can they? In the big bathtub? Of course, baby. Help them with the water temperature, okay? Make sure it's not too hot. As Benjamin herded his sisters toward the bathroom, chattering excitedly about bubbles and hot water, Sarah sank onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. Sarah. Harrison sat beside her, careful to maintain some distance. I know this is overwhelming. I know you have every reason not to trust me. But please don't let your feelings about me prevent you from accepting help for them. It's not just about you, Sarah said quietly. It's about what happens when this ends. What happens when you realize that being responsible for 4 people is harder than writing checks? What happens when the triplets ask why their new daddy doesn't love them the same way he loves Benjamin? That won't happen. How can you promise that? You've known them for less than 24 hours. You have no idea what it's like to live with children day in and day out. The tantrums, the illnesses, the constant needs, the way they test boundaries and push limits. This isn't a business deal you can manage from your office. Harrison was quiet for a moment, acknowledging the truth in her words. You're right. I don't know what it's like, but I want to learn. Sarah, I can't undo the past. I can't give you back those years or take away the struggle you've endured, but I can promise you this. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens between us, whatever you decide about me being in Benjamin's life, I will make sure that your family has everything they need. Legally binding? Sarah asked, the practical side of her asserting itself. If that's what it takes. From the bathroom came the sound of splashing and giggles, the pure joy of children experiencing simple pleasures they'd been denied for too long. Sarah closed her eyes and listened to her babies being happy, really happy for the first time in months. One step at a time, she said finally. Tonight we stay here. Tomorrow we figure out what comes next. One step at a time, Harrison agreed. Neither of them mentioned the elephant in the room, that by tomorrow they would have DNA confirmation of what they both already knew. Benjamin was Harrison's son, and nothing would ever be the same again. The question was whether they could build something new from the ashes of what they'd lost, something that honored both the love they'd once shared and the independent life Sarah had fought so hard to create. The DNA results arrived at 6 a.m. the next morning, delivered by courier to the hotel suite where Harrison had spent a sleepless night in the adjoining room. Dr. Collins had called ahead to warn him, but seeing the official documentation still felt like a physical confirmation of what had changed his entire world. Benjamin Parker was his biological son, with 97% certainty. Harrison stared at the papers in the early morning light streaming through the suite's windows, the scientific proof of what his heart had known the moment he saw Benjamin's face. Somewhere in the next room, his son was probably still asleep, curled up in a real bed for the first time in months, unaware that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Sarah emerged from the children's bedroom quietly, closing the door behind her with care. She looked tired but more rested than she had in years, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the severe ponytail she wore for work. The hotel bathrobe was too big for her small frame, making her look younger and more vulnerable than the fierce protector she'd become. They're still sleeping, she said softly. All four of them in one bed, even though there are two. I think they're afraid to be separated, afraid this will all disappear if they're not together. The test results came, Harrison said, holding up the papers. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. And? Benjamin is my son. The words hung in the air between them, official now in a way that changed everything and nothing simultaneously. Sarah had known this truth for 8 years. Harrison had suspected it for less than 48 hours. So what happens now? Sarah asked, settling into the chair across from him. That depends on you. No, Harrison, it doesn't. It depends on what's best for Benjamin and the girls. This isn't about what I want or what you want anymore. It's about 4 children who have already been through too much uncertainty. Before Harrison could respond, the sound of small feet padding across the floor announced that the children were awake. Benjamin appeared first, his blonde hair sticking up at odd angles, followed by the triplets who were still in the hotel bathrobes that were comically oversized on their small frames. Good morning, Benjamin said politely, though his eyes were bright with the kind of energy that came from a full night's sleep on a comfortable bed. Good morning, sweetheart, Sarah said, opening her arms for hugs. How did everyone sleep? Best sleep ever, Madison announced, climbing into Sarah's lap. The bed was like sleeping on a cloud and the pillows were so soft. And we didn't hear any sirens or yelling, Chloe added matter-of-factly, referring to the constant noise from their old neighborhood that had become such a part of their lives they'd stopped noticing it. And the bathroom has those tiny bottles, Zoe said excitedly. I saved mine to show you, Mama. They smell like flowers. Harrison watched this morning routine with fascination and heartbreak. These simple interactions, morning hugs, excited chatter about tiny shampoo bottles, were moments he'd missed entirely. 7 years of good mornings, bedtime stories, scraped knees, and proud achievements that he'd never get back. Mr. Sterling, Benjamin said formally, approaching with the careful politeness he used with adults. Thank you for letting us stay here. It was the best night we've had in a really long time. You're very welcome, Benjamin. What would everyone like for breakfast? We have cereal, Sarah said quickly, the automatic response of someone used to managing expectations and declining offers that might come with strings attached. Actually, Harrison said carefully, I thought we might order room service. They have pancakes, eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, whatever you'd like. The children's eyes lit up like Christmas morning, but they all looked to their mother for permission. Sarah felt the familiar weight of being the one who had to say no to things they couldn't afford, the one who had to be practical while their faces showed such hope. Please, Mama? Zoe asked quietly, her small voice carrying the weight of a child who had learned not to ask for much. Just this once? Sarah looked at her youngest daughter, this sweet child who asked for so little and had received even less, and felt her resolve crumble. Just this once. The breakfast that arrived 40 minutes later was a feast beyond the children's wildest dreams. Fresh strawberries and blueberries that actually tasted like fruit instead of the canned versions they occasionally had, fluffy pancakes with real maple syrup, scrambled eggs that were perfectly creamy, crispy bacon, and orange juice that was clearly fresh squeezed. The children ate with the focused intensity of people who weren't sure when they might see such abundance again. Slow down, babies, Sarah said gently. The food isn't going anywhere. But she understood their urgency. When food was scarce, you ate quickly, and you ate everything, because you never knew when the next meal might come. It was a survival instinct born of necessity, not greed. Harrison watched Benjamin carefully cut his pancakes into small pieces, then noticed the boy sliding portions onto his sister's plates when he thought no one was looking. Even here, with plenty of food for everyone, Benjamin's instinct was to make sure his sisters had enough before he worried about himself. Benjamin, Harrison said quietly, there's more food in the kitchen if anyone is still hungry. You don't need to share yours. The boy looked up, startled at being caught in his automatic generosity. I know. They really like pancakes, and I want to make sure they get enough. You like pancakes too, don't you? Benjamin nodded, but continued portioning out his food. 7 years of being the protector, the provider, the one who made sure his sisters were taken care of, wasn't going to change over a single meal. Harrison's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Car ready downstairs whenever you need it. Clothes shopping arranged for 10 a.m. if still needed. Also, legal team standing by for consultation whenever you're ready. Sarah, Harrison said, I need to ask you something and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Sarah stiffened, recognizing the tone that meant serious conversation. Girls, why don't you go watch cartoons in the bedroom for a while? The remote is on the nightstand. Once the children had settled in front of the television, voices carrying their excitement about having access to cartoon channels, Sarah turned back to Harrison. What is it? I want to formally acknowledge Benjamin as my son. Legally. I want to add his name to my will, set up trust funds for all of them, make sure they're protected no matter what happens to me. Harrison. I know it's a lot. I know it changes things, but Sarah, he's my son. If something happened to you, what would happen to him? To the girls? The thought of them ending up in foster care or struggling the way you have. He couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. What are you asking for in return? Nothing. No custody demands. No visitation requirements. I'm asking for the right to provide for my son and the family that raised him. That's all. You say that now, but what happens when you meet someone else? When you want a normal family without the complications of a ready-made one? What happens when you realize that being responsible for 4 people is more complicated than you imagined? I'm not going to meet someone else, Harrison said with quiet certainty. Sarah, you and Benjamin and those girls, you're my family. That's what I've learned in the last 48 hours. Everything else I thought mattered. It doesn't. That's easy to say now when this is all new and emotional. What about when the novelty wears off? What about when Benjamin has a tantrum or fails a test or goes through a rebellious phase? What about when the girls get older and more expensive? What about when I get sick or tired or can't manage everything? Harrison leaned forward, his eyes intense. Then we figure it out together. Sarah, I'm not asking to take your place. I'm asking to stand beside you. Before Sarah could respond, Benjamin appeared in the doorway, his expression serious. Mama? Can we stay here another night? The girls really like having their own space, and the beds are so comfortable. The innocent question cut straight to the heart of everything they'd been discussing. Sarah looked at her son, this brave little boy who'd grown up too fast, and saw hope in his eyes that she was terrified to crush. "We'll see, baby. Mr. Sterling and I are still talking about what comes next." "Okay," Benjamin said, accepting this non-answer with the patience of a child used to adult conversations that determined his fate. "Zoe wanted me to ask if we can have lunch here, too. She really likes the strawberries, and she's never had them fresh before." "Tell Zoe we'll see about lunch," Sarah said gently, her heart breaking a little at the mention of fresh strawberries being a novelty for her 3-year-old daughter. After Benjamin returned to his sisters, Sarah turned back to Harrison. "This is what I mean. They're already getting attached to this life. What happens when it ends? Why does it have to end? Because this isn't real life, Harrison. Real life is work and bills and sleepless nights and constant worry. Real life is making dinner from whatever's left in the cabinet and hoping the utilities don't get shut off again." "Not anymore," Harrison said firmly. "Sarah, that part of your life is over if you let it be. Your children will never sleep on cardboard again. They'll never go hungry again. They'll never wonder if they're safe again." At what cost? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. What would Harrison expect from her? What would it cost her pride, her independence, her carefully constructed life? "The cost," Harrison said quietly, "is letting me help. The cost is accepting that you don't have to carry this burden alone anymore. The cost is trusting me not to disappear again." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the Detroit streets where normal people were starting their normal days, going to normal jobs, living normal lives that didn't include billionaire ex-boyfriends and DNA tests and luxury hotel suites. "I need time," she said finally. "This is too much, too fast. I need to think about what's best for them, not just what's easiest." "How much time?" "I don't know. A few days. A week. However long it takes to figure out what the right answer is." Harrison nodded, though every instinct screamed at him to push, to convince her, to make her see that the right answer was obvious. But he'd pushed her once before and lost everything. This time he would wait. "Whatever you decide," he said. "The offer stands. Trust funds, legal recognition, support for all of you, regardless of whether you want me in your lives personally. And if I say no to everything, if I decide we're better off on our own?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "Then I'll respect your decision, but Sarah, I'll also make sure that Benjamin knows when he's older that his father wanted to be part of his life. I won't let him grow up thinking he wasn't wanted." The weight of that statement settled over Sarah like a blanket. No matter what she decided, Benjamin would eventually learn the truth about his parentage. The question was whether she would be the one to tell him, or whether he would discover it some other way. From the bedroom came the sound of children's laughter, pure and joyful and completely unaware of the adult decisions being made about their future. Sarah closed her eyes and listened to her babies being happy, and wondered how she was supposed to choose between pride and security, between independence and acceptance, between the life they'd built and the life Harrison was offering. The only thing she knew for certain was that whatever she decided would change everything and there would be no going back. 5 days later, Sarah stood in the lobby of Sterling Industries holding Benjamin's hand while the triplets pressed their faces against the floor-to-ceiling windows, marveling at the view 42 floors above the Detroit streets. After 5 nights in the hotel suite, 5 days of room service and comfortable beds and more food than they could eat, she'd finally made her decision. The extra time had been necessary. She'd used it to think, to research, to make phone calls to legal aid organizations about her rights and options. She'd also used it to watch Harrison with the children during his daily visits, observing how he interacted with them when he thought she wasn't looking. "This is where Mr. Sterling works?" Benjamin asked, his voice filled with awe as he took in the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the obvious wealth and power that permeated every surface. "Yes, baby. This is his office building." "It's really big," Madison observed, her small voice echoing in the vast space. "It's like a castle," Zoe whispered, still clutching Bunny, even though they'd bought her several new stuffed animals during a shopping trip the day before. Some securities, Sarah had learned, couldn't be replaced easily. Sarah smoothed down Benjamin's hair and adjusted the collar of his new shirt, one of many items of clothing that had appeared in their hotel suite, perfectly sized and clearly expensive. The children looked different now, well-fed and well-dressed, but she could still see the wariness in their eyes, the careful way they moved through this foreign environment. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent, except for Chloe's excited whispers about how high they were going. When the doors opened, they were greeted by Margaret, Harrison's assistant, who smiled warmly at the children. "Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in his office," she said kindly. "Can I get anyone something to drink? We have juice boxes and cookies." The children looked to Sarah for permission, and she nodded. As Margaret led them toward Harrison's office, Sarah felt her resolve strengthening. This world of assistants and corner offices and juice boxes that appeared on command. It was impressive, but it was also Harrison's world, not theirs. Harrison's office was even more impressive than the lobby, with its stunning view of the city and furnishings that probably cost more than Sarah's annual income. But what struck her most was how Harrison looked when he saw them, the way his whole face lit up, the genuine joy at seeing Benjamin and the girls again. "You came," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I said I would," Sarah replied. "When I make a promise, I keep it." Benjamin walked straight to Harrison, looking up at him with those serious blue eyes. "Mr. Sterling, Mama says you want to talk to us about important stuff." "I do, Benjamin, very important stuff. But first, how has everyone been? Are you still liking the hotel?" "It's amazing," Chloe said shyly. "The beds are so soft, and there's always hot water, and the TV has cartoons all day long. And room service," Zoe added excitedly. "We can call and ask for anything we want, and they bring it right to the door." Harrison smiled, but Sarah could see the pain in his eyes at how excited her children were about basic necessities like hot water and adequate food, and access to children's television programming. "Girls, why don't you explore the office a little? There are some toys in that corner that my friend brought for children who visit." As the triplets wandered toward a small play area that had obviously been set up specifically for this visit, Sarah took a deep breath and faced Harrison. "I've made my decision," she said quietly. "And I'll accept some of your help, but I have conditions." Harrison nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm listening." "First, the children and I maintain our independence. We're not moving into your penthouse or becoming your kept family. We'll find our own place, something reasonable but nice. Good neighborhood, good schools, enough space for all of us, but not a mansion." "Sarah, you don't need to prove anything by limiting yourself." "Yes, I do. I need to prove to myself that I'm still capable of taking care of my children. A nice apartment, Harrison. Safe, comfortable, appropriate for a family of 5, but still a place where I pay rent and manage the household." Harrison wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her eyes. "All right, second condition. You don't get to make unilateral decisions about the children. Benjamin is your son, but he's also mine, and the girls are mine entirely. If you want to be part of their lives, you ask first, you discuss it with me, and you respect my role as their primary parent. Of course, third, you don't disappear. If you're going to be in Benjamin's life, you're in it for the long term. No backing out when things get difficult or complicated. No changing your mind when the responsibilities become real instead of romantic. Benjamin has already lost one father figure when Marcus died. I won't let him lose another." Harrison stepped closer, his eyes intense. "Sarah, I am never disappearing from his life again, from any of your lives. You have my word, and I'll put it in writing if necessary." "Your word means something different now than it did 8 years ago," Sarah said quietly. "You're going to have to prove it over time." "I understand. Is there a fourth condition?" Sarah hesitated, then forced herself to say the words that were hardest of all. "The relationship between you and me, there isn't one. We're co-parenting Benjamin, nothing more. Whatever was between us before is over and stays over." Harrison felt that statement like a physical blow, but he nodded. "If that's what you need." "It's what needs to happen. For the children's sake, for everyone's sake. We can't build their future on the foundation of our past." "Mama?" Benjamin had approached them quietly, his young face serious. Are you talking about me? Sarah knelt down to his level. Yes, baby. Mr. Sterling has something very important to tell you. Harrison knelt beside Sarah, his heart pounding. This moment would change everything for Benjamin, and there was no taking it back once the words were spoken. Benjamin, you know how some children have fathers who live with them, and some have fathers who live somewhere else? Benjamin nodded solemnly. Like Tommy at school. His dad lives in another city but visits every other weekend. Well, Benjamin, I'm your father, your biological father. That means you're my son. The words hung in the air as Benjamin processed this information. His blue eyes, so like Harrison's, moved between his mother and Harrison, trying to understand what this meant for his life and his family. Are you going to take me away from Mama? He asked quietly, his first concern immediately for the stability of the only life he'd known. No, Harrison said firmly. Never. Your Mama is the most important person in your life, and that's never going to change. I just want to be part of your life too, if you'll let me. What about my sisters? They're part of your family, which makes them part of my family too. I want to help take care of all of you. Benjamin considered this carefully, displaying the thoughtfulness that had kept his family together through their darkest times. Will you help Mama? She works really hard, and sometimes she's really tired. Yes, I will always help your Mama take care of you. And you won't leave, like you won't get tired of us or decide we're too much work? The question cut straight to the heart of Harrison's greatest fear, that he would somehow fail this child who had already endured too much uncertainty. I will never leave you, Benjamin, I promise. I'm your father, and that means I'm here forever. Benjamin studied Harrison's face for a long moment, searching for any sign of doubt or insincerity. Finally, slowly, he smiled. Okay, I think I'd like to have a dad. The simple acceptance, the trust offered so freely despite everything Benjamin had experienced, brought tears to Harrison's eyes. He reached out slowly, and Benjamin stepped into his arms for the second time, a small boy hugging his father. From across the office, the triplets had been watching this exchange with wide eyes. Madison, always the spokesperson, approached cautiously. Does this mean we're going to be rich now? She asked with the blunt curiosity of a 3-year-old. Despite the emotional weight of the moment, both Sarah and Harrison laughed. It means you're going to be safe now, Sarah said gently. It means you'll always have enough food and warm beds and everything you need. Can we keep the tiny bottles from the hotel? Zoe asked hopefully. You can keep anything you want from the hotel, Harrison assured her. Even the bath towels, they're so fluffy, Chloe added. Especially the fluffy towels. Over the next 2 hours, Harrison explained to the children what would change and what would stay the same. They would move to a new apartment, but they would stay together as a family. Benjamin would get to know his father, but Sarah would always be their primary parent. They would have security and stability, but they would also have expectations. School would be important, kindness would be required, and they would never forget how fortunate they were. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah watched Harrison with the children and saw something she hadn't fully appreciated before. Genuine paternal instinct. When Chloe scraped her knee exploring the office, Harrison was immediately concerned, checking the injury and offering comfort. When Zoe got tired, he lifted her onto his shoulders without hesitation. When Madison peppered him with questions about his work, he answered each one patiently and thoroughly. Most importantly, she saw how he was with Benjamin. Careful not to overwhelm the boy, but clearly hungry for every interaction, every smile, every moment of connection with the son he'd never known he had. There was pain in Harrison's eyes every time Benjamin called him Mr. Sterling instead of Dad, but he never pushed, never demanded more than Benjamin was ready to give. Sarah, Harrison said quietly while the children were distracted with toys. I know you said no relationship between us, and I'll respect that completely. But I need you to know something. Harrison, just this once, let me say it. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped regretting what I lost. I know I don't deserve a second chance, and I know it's too late for us, but I needed you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life, and seeing what an incredible mother you've become, seeing the strength and grace with which you've raised Benjamin. I'm in awe of you. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. Harrison, don't. I know. I just needed to say it once. I won't bring it up again." As the afternoon drew to a close, Margaret appeared with keys to a furnished 3-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood near excellent schools, temporary housing until they could find something permanent. Harrison had also arranged for a reliable used car, appropriate for a family of 5, and enrollment in a private school for Benjamin that would challenge him academically while providing the stability he'd never had. "This is still too much," Sarah protested as Harrison outlined the arrangements. "This is a foundation," Harrison corrected. "Sarah, you've spent 7 years making sure Benjamin survived. Now let me help him thrive." As they prepared to leave, Benjamin surprised everyone by walking back to Harrison and hugging him again. "Thank you," the boy said simply, "for helping us, for being my dad." "Thank you," Harrison replied, his voice thick with emotion, "for giving me the chance." 2 hours later, as Sarah tucked her children into real beds in their new apartment, she reflected on how much their lives had changed in less than a week. From sleeping on cardboard to having a billionaire father figure, from wondering where their next meal would come from, to having trust funds that would secure their futures. But the most profound change wasn't material. It was the knowledge that they were no longer alone. For 4 years since Marcus died, Sarah had carried the weight of providing for and protecting her children entirely by herself. Now, for the first time since she'd lost the love of her life, she had a partner in that responsibility. "Mama?" Benjamin's voice came softly from his new bed. "Yes, baby? Is it okay to be happy about having a dad? Even though we were okay without one?" Sarah's heart clenched with love for this wise little boy who always thought of others first. "It's more than okay, Benjamin. It's wonderful. You deserve to have a father who loves you. Do you think he really loves me? Or does he just feel guilty about us?" Sarah considered her answer carefully, thinking about the pain she'd seen in Harrison's eyes when he looked at Benjamin, the careful way he interacted with all the children, the obvious, genuine emotion when Benjamin hugged him. "I think he loves you very much, baby. And I think he's going to keep loving you more every day." "Good," Benjamin said sleepily. "I think I could love him too. Is that okay?" "That's more than okay. That's exactly what should happen." As her children drifted off to sleep in their new beds, in their new apartment, with their new security and their new future spreading out before them, Sarah finally allowed herself to cry. Not tears of sadness or regret, but tears of relief and gratitude and hope. For the first time in 4 years, her children were truly safe. For the first time since Marcus died, she wasn't carrying the burden alone. For the first time since she'd walked away from Harrison Sterling, she could imagine a future that didn't involve constant struggle and worry. It wasn't the future she'd once dreamed of. There would be no reconciliation with Harrison, no fairy tale romance, no healing of old wounds between them. But it was something better. A future where her children could grow up with love, security, and opportunities she'd never been able to provide alone. Outside her window, Detroit stretched out under the evening sky, and somewhere across the city, Harrison Sterling was probably lying awake thinking about the son he'd found and the woman he'd lost. But here in this moment, Sarah allowed herself to simply be grateful. Her emergency call had saved them all.